Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. We originally started to elect our first woman president. We didn't get quite there, but we've elected our first woman vice president, so we're calling that a huge success. And we're all ready to celebrate that. So I am going to turn it over to Rebecca now to introduce our guest for today. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, and welcome everybody on this eve of Thanksgiving. As Kelly said, we started out with our the campaign that so many of us participated in to elect a woman president. We moved on quite excitedly to support Kamala Harris as the first woman in the Oval Office, and we'll continue to celebrate that. But underlying all of our discussions is a discussion and a concern and commitment to learning about women who lead, women who do creative things in the public sphere, who show what it means to be an activist in their respective professions. And so as I was thinking about our post-election time, and particularly about Thanksgiving, a favorite holiday of mine, I thought it would be really cool if we could talk with various women artists, those who do have a political message of sorts, a social justice commitment, so that they could share with us their views on broadly construed the idea of Vote Her In. And we began the series with two pals who do Dead Feminists. If you haven't seen that yet, I encourage you to. They're just Chandler and Jessica, who do broadsides about important women political figures. And today in our second episode, we're just thrilled, I think I can speak for Kelly as well, to have Jen and Chotsani Elaine with us. I have known Jen for, I don't know, maybe over a decade, from when she was a young, aspiring potter. She's gone on to great good fortune in the beauty of her work and her commitment to her work. And in this last year, she expanded to making masks. And we're going to be talking about that with her. Chotsani is a newer friend. I first learned about her work a couple of years ago, bought a piece of hers, which may be in the slideshow, which really talks about African American history and fiber and cotton. And what better idea than having the two of you together. I want to give credit where credit is due to Jill Foote-Hutton, the editor of Studio Potter, who said, why not bring Jen and Chotsani together? So here you are, and welcome everybody. We're going to begin by asking Jen and Chotsani each to sort of share in brief a kind of how did they get from where they started to this place, and we'll then move on to looking at their work and hearing them talk about it. So welcome. Jen, why don't you start? We'll just go in alphabetical order.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen, and I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. A little bit about myself. So I grew up the daughter of a U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist, and my mother was kind of a craftswoman and also a phys ed teacher. So kind of a pivotal move in my young life was I moved from Atlanta, Georgia up to Anchorage, Alaska. And I'd say that was the winter of '91 when I was a freshman in high school. And that probably was, well, I know it was really instrumental in the work that I make. Growing up in Anchorage is kind of a melting pot of a city. And we were exposed to a lot of beautiful native art up there. And I worked at Joann Fabrics and I started sewing. And then I went to undergraduate school and I started making pots. And I fell in love with ceramics and I never looked back. And then fast forward 25 years and here I am. I've got, after going through undergraduate school, graduate school, I'm now in Morgantown, West Virginia. And I have a studio, which I'm sitting in right now, and feel very fortunate to be in this spot and to be able to make work and share it with the world, really. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I'm Chotsani, and I'm from Connecticut, New England. I grew up going to Washington, D.C. every summer. And my family's also from northern New Jersey. So that combination of constant cultural engagement, I think, growing up in museums, and that aspect of history is something I'm realizing has really informed the way I approach work. My father was a commercial printer, and I grew up going into print shops and, having Pantones around the house and commercial printing magazines all over the place. And my mom is in finance. So I spent a lot of time watching her. She got her Series 7, was a stockbroker. So I think I think I'm seeing now, maybe that's where some of the economic aspects come from. Seeing my mother, she takes care of all my financial stuff. So maybe that's where the visual and that kind of financial, political aspect comes from, what I've seen growing up and spending time in DC. And always really being interested in why I'm able to do what I do. What are the things that made it possible, even in this moment, sitting here discussing things that are both intellectual, but also come out of my hand and material. So I'm interested in those kinds of aspects.
So related to this, and by way of an introduction to Jen and Chotsani talking about their work, I just would say a word about why I think it's so important to hear what they have to say. I think that for those of us who've been political activists for a long time, there sometimes isn't as great a recognition as there ought to be about the role that imagery and the words of artists have as. And so I think that for my own part, I started collecting ceramics and some women's textiles and posters and broadsides a long time ago, because I felt that I wanted to just record this from the women's activism that I was a part of. And I kind of realized that, this is more than a notion, this is our history together. And so I want to invite you, as you listen to Jen and Chotsani, to really think about the multifaceted way in which we engage politically, in which we engage in social justice causes, in which we even present ourselves here in media as we are doing today. So with that, I think that Chotsani, maybe you'll start, because your work goes way back in American history, and of course even around the time when people started, so to speak, celebrating Thanksgiving and what it means. So I invite you to start here, and Chotsani will be showing images, so watch out, here they come.
I'll have to go. Oh. Okay, is it full screen? Behaving
yes.
with do great. So I made a title image here. If you want to see more of the work and see the materials that are that come together to make these pieces, there's my website address. And I chose these two images in the beginning to show me holding cotton, which in every single piece that's in this slideshow is cotton that I grew. I didn't order it from anywhere. Already grown. I did it. I sowed the seed and saw it to its end point. And to prove that, here is me in front of some cotton about midsummer, where it's just a baby here, and I had never seen cotton. It wasn't like some big moment I decided to grow it. I came down to the South. That's, we think of the Civil War, we think of all of the, economic aspects of this country. Labor, I thought I should participate in that. A lot of what I did was read about it. And I grew up in a place, close to Wall Street that, had the hidden aspects of cotton, and the North was no way less complicit in this, horrific time of enslavement in this country and why it has the wealth it has. I wanted to take some ownership and experience that myself. So the first year, I only grew one variety, which is Sea Island cotton. It's the brown cotton that you see in the image on the right. But after that, I just decided to grow several different kinds. And the white cotton that you see is called red foliated cotton. There's another cotton in there called Nankeen brown, and another one called Arkansas green lint. And as I continue to research cotton, I had no idea how many different varieties there were. And the different varieties and strains come out of both the British and colonists trying to grow cotton wherever they could. And part of my reason for going to India for Fulbright research was that before the plantations in the South, India, was really the powerhouse of cotton. People were producing it in their homes from start to finish, but the difference was the cotton wasn't their main crop. It was a subsistence crop. And the people trying to colonize, well, India was colonized, but in trying to control the cotton, they could never do that. And a lot of the economic aspects or financiers and people who are making lots of money off the trade of cotton could see that the situation in young America wasn't going to last with enslaved labor. So I was really interested in all of the attempts, made to grow cotton in different places and have control over it, and how it continues to be, through textiles, a really big industry. So this is the piece on the very left is a memory spoon, and that's the piece that's in Rebecca's collection. I'm also interested in quilts. The work will always come out of that. I'll never leave that behind. That was sort of the first place I encountered cotton was in quilts. And what I was really interested in was the duality of a quilt, that it's both utilitarian, but it also can hold something. It becomes something that's passed on and functions in a different manner. And I do on purpose leave the cotton in its original form, because everything we experience with cotton is from the time it's been transformed. I'm interested in keeping it in its cotton ball form. And when I grew the cotton, I did not know that I was going to do all of this with it. People kept asking me, what are you going to do with it? And I didn't know until I made these pieces and it came together. So the wording you see here on these tiles, these are made by a block printer in India. And that was also part of my research during my Fulbright, was to look at textiles. And I went to Jaipur and I went to the Enoki Museum of Block Printing. And that's really a tradition that's disappearing in India. And so I got back to Varanasi and found myself a block carver. He didn't speak any English. I had to really get my Hindi together. I had to memorize things before I went there to pick up my stamps. But this is my handwriting, and he was able to carve it exactly as I wrote. So this is where I just work on these individual tiles, and you saw in the piece previously how they all come together. And I've started to expand these tiles more into horizontal formats, because now I'm interested in thinking about all these different layers of time and all these different operations and outcomes that come from that one single little ball of cotton in trading. And so this is another piece that I made, and the title is Minge Bushel, and Minge is Dutch for mine. And I've become interested in that use of the Dutch language as I look more closely at Sojourner Truth, not just for the quick February image we get of Sojourner Truth, but that she was Dutch and her first language was Dutch and not English. And this is the very first piece. This is like the first batch of cotton that I grew, that I put together with clay. And one thing that I think was really prominent is I read a lot of the slave narratives, and a lot of them talk about the end of the day bushel and standing in line, waiting to see what the weight is going to be of what you picked. And this is very small. So I'm doing something that's really the opposite. I'm in control of the quantity and I'm in control of what's done after it's harvested. And so then these are some details. This was also a piece that Rebecca saw in the same exhibition with the spoon. This is Outbid, Freed Without Money. And just thinking about, like I said earlier, the liberation and the freedom I have and the responsibility I have to steward that, and not only in my work, but also in my teaching, and the way I approach clay and the pedagogy I put together in terms of how individuals can find that kind of liberation in the material for themselves. And this is a piece with a very long title. It really, for me, represents the transatlantic, diasporic, and transformative aspects of clay. And I'm thinking about cargo. I wrote it in that quilt piece that you saw earlier, but now I'm thinking about that idea of cargo and trade, but also of people, being enslaved. And this is, in the South, I became very interested in the way the food reflects the history, the complex and full of strife history between, white people and Black people, and how it brings them together, but how there was still this kind of hidden hierarchy, but also clear hierarchy that, as someone from the North, I wasn't used to seeing. So I began working with these spoons and seeing, in the way that a recipe cooked holds flavor, how do I represent that same thing in a utilitarian object? In the way that I'm fascinated with quilts, how do I expand that idea of utility and really express the metaphor that exists there? And this was one of the very first memory spoons that I made. And so this is for Georgia Gilmore, who basically supported the Montgomery bus boycott by selling fried chicken and working with other cooks and bakers so that, as people were boycotting the bus system, they could still get to work. So she's someone that I look to often. And think about, I don't really have too much, in terms of hurdles to get over. So I think, again, my responsibility is to make sure it's not just me, but everyone can see what that kind of perseverance and tenacity and strength is. That's part of our American history and allows us to, sit here. And as Rebecca said, community and it makes us understand even more the importance of Kamala Harris being in the White House. I mean, this is, in the 60s that, Georgia Gilmore made this impact in the civil rights movement. And it was slow, but we can see now it was steady. So that's my last image. Did I keep it to time?
You did beautifully. It's fabulous. I have to say, I'm so glad you ended that way, because we do think about Kamala and all of the other women of color who've been elected this year more than in any other year in American history. So there's much to be thankful for tomorrow. Jen, you want to share with us too?
Yeah. Let's see. All right. Okay, are we at full screen? Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, so when Rebecca invited me to participate in this talk, it mainly was based on my more recent kind of political activity of making masks. And so I wanted to focus this talk not on my ceramic work, but on kind of the impetus why I'm making these masks now. So this is just pulled off of the CDC's website, and it's just giving people ideas of what masks. So this is like propaganda that's on our computer screens that we see all the time, telling us the right and wrong way to wear things or do things. And then so I was interested in kind of the history of not only masking, but also the history of women kind of stepping up for the country in times of need and during war times. And so I was looking back at propaganda posters from World War I. The Red Cross put out this big campaign to get women to knit their bit. And here's a...
There you are, Kelly.
And here's an image of a bunch of mask makers during the Spanish flu epidemic. So I just found these images really fascinating and timely for time we're in now. And then fast forward to World War II, when the Rosie riveter campaign kind of came out, encouraging women to step up and join the defense industry, and again do their part to help the soldiers overseas, to kind of unite in this way that feels more like socialism than anything else to me. And then
Jen, just hold on one sec. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I just think that it put everybody on an even playing field, and it wanted everybody to participate in the greater good, which I really try to adhere to in my life. And so it just seems like it's something that we're asked to do again now, but there's a lot of divisiveness and negativity, and it's just hard. Like, it seemed during that time it was hard when the war was happening, and then right after there was this period of progress, and that's what I'm really excited for, is what's going to happen after COVID. Like, I really feel like there's some kind of big expansive movement that we're just on the cusp of, and that to me is really exciting. So these are current posters, propaganda posters made by artists today. The one on the right is Shepherd Ferry, and that he made for the state of Rhode Island. It's a hope and strength poster that he made specifically for the COVID pandemic. And then on the left is an artist named Dash Dixon, and I just really loved the imagery and the text in that. And so I did mention, like, after times of war came times of progress, and for me, one of the most exciting times in textile history is post-World War II textiles. And here's a sampling of different designers that kind of erupted during that time period. And these are ones that I looked to get their textiles someday, but pieces of their textiles are so expensive. I mean, you can see them in museums, in the MoMA, the V&A museum. There's samples of these pieces. So, and then fast forward now to contemporary surface design artists, and these are kind of a smattering of people that I am really inspired by, their prints. And the list of names is there in case anybody was interested in who made the textiles. It is kind of in clockwise from the top left, with Ann Kell. And then I was thinking too about trying to be more responsible with my choices of manufacturers. And so now I'm diving into this history. I've spent my entire career dealing with ceramics and ceramic history, and a little bit of textile history thrown in, but never to the extent that I'm going in now. And it's really exciting, but it's also really frightening, because I'm such an adolescent when it comes to into understanding, like, surface design history. In making my own masks, I do try to source responsible products. So I'm looking at organic products, much of which is produced overseas, however. So I did find this brand called the American Made brand. They're in Seattle, Washington. They've only been around for a number of years, but they source all their cotton locally, and they grow it, they harvest it, they spin it, they dye it, everything, they put it on bolts, everything's done here in the States. So that to me felt like a good company to support. So I started buying their fabrics. And then Evelon is a German brand of fabric that is a spun-bound fabric that I use for kind of the filtration layer inside my masks. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because even when I was layering like 3 layers of cotton, I could still see light through it. And so I knew that it wasn't the best filtration that I could get. And so this company makes products for the allergy and asthma industry. They make pillowcases, mattress covers. And so I felt like using their product would be a good fit. You can wash it on high heat, you can dry, and I feel like it provides that barrier that I wanted, that extra layer of cotton wasn't giving me. So this is kind of what I'm using to make my masks. Most recently, I've been collaborating with a couple of other artists, 2 of which are clay artists. Meredith Host, who's in the center there, the dinner napkin with the fork, she's just recently started creating her own screen printed textiles, and she just sent me yards and yards of fabric to make masks from. So I've been making masks out of that. I actually have some I can show you. And then Molly Hatch just sent me a bunch of fabric as well, so I'm excited to make some masks out of that fabric. And Bryn Parrott is a wood carver who lives in the same town that I live in, and I'm just really excited about her designs on something that is worn. All of these are strong women that have a really, I think, unique and strong voice in their own areas, and I'm super excited to collaborate with them on this series of masks. And here are some of the masks that I've made. They're out in the world. Some of these fabrics are some of my favorite designers. William Morris is in there, who is a giant when it comes to not only the history of textiles, but also the history of politics in Britain, during the Industrial Revolution. And then, yeah, just a bunch of people wearing a mask. One of Meredith's is up there too.
That blue one up at the top there, right?
Yeah, that one's her fabric.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I'm gonna just grab, I'm gonna stop this sharing because that's the end. And then I'm gonna just reach and grab these masks that I have. Excuse me for 1 sec.
I actually realized I have one of Jen's William Morris masks here. I have Molly Hatch, I have Chotsani, but someday we'll have a version of Antiques Roadshow where we show an old woman's collection of women's art. How's that?
Yeah, this is one of the Meredith pieces here.
Uh-huh.
It's really fun.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, so taking off from that, and Kelly and I had a couple of questions we wanted to talk with you about ideas. And the first one really is what you said a moment ago when you referenced William Morris, that, there's a long history of artists who have political commitment, as we mentioned at the outset, and who sustained that commitment throughout their lives. In contemporary life, there's Judy Chicago. A lot of people know about her, other famous women who have been really strong feminists. And we were curious as to your thoughts about how, as you look ahead, post-pandemic, and we can all be out and about and organizing and talking and demonstrating and whatever we need to do. If you could share with us, and maybe Chotsani, if you would start, how you see your own art plus activism coming together?
I think for me, it always really happens in the classroom. You know, it's something that I write into the curriculum, and also elevating craft, elevating clay, which oftentimes gets co-opted by corporations that wind up putting it into a SKU category, you know, and a lot of young students think they have to meet that standard. And part of what I think I try to do, and sometimes at risk of making students angry with me, is getting them to see they have the capacity to be producers, and that their ideas are the ones that everyone else is after, not the reverse. You know, so that's something I put a challenge for to myself when I'm teaching, and even the way I approach the work myself. You know, how much do you let influence your aesthetic? You know, having enough visual literacy to know when something's been watered down and adulterated, you know? And so for me, it's taking those parts of my ancestries that comes out of quilts, that those quilts, you know, as we see in Gee's Bend, they got great popularity. That was co-opted too by like Kathy Ireland or something like that. But that those were women who were in a situation in which they had to fulfill someone else's wishes aesthetically and learn that in a very uncomfortable, untenable environment. And after doing that, still went home and used whatever was left over and taught resourcefulness by action in something that we now have categorized as a craft, quilting, you know. So that's where, you know, my role is to make sure that, you know, and I'm a woman, and especially other young women don't think that that's a lesser form of expression, that it's a high form of expression, because it's high skill, high tech.
These women's crafts.
You know, so I think, you know, I know that seems odd that I don't transform the cotton, but I think in that I'm trying to bring the viewer back to that origin, to show about the possibility. You know, it's like when you get that bag of clay, everyone gets the same bag. You know, so I think, you know, and then even thinking about, you know, activists, you mentioned William Morris, you know, and even Josiah Wedgwood, you know, dedicated a lot to the abolitionist movement. But then if you look at the aesthetics and you see the table at which the people who are sitting, it shifts completely. You know, the people who use that. So the intention of the creator, then to the people using it, there's a huge shift in that, because now you're entering into a class situation. You know, so when I make utilitarian wares and the things I'm referencing, I'm, you know, similar, you mentioned Chicago earlier, I'm making my own now place settings and space in those objects, you know, to evoke, you know, and to say I'm present and I'm here now. So
Jen?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's been discussion recently, and I know throughout history, but the whole idea of pottery being political. And I think that it most certainly is. And so going forward, I'm going to continue to make pots and get them in as many people's houses as I can, and try to just make and surround myself with the things that I feel are important in this world, and through my work, hopefully, those kind of sensibilities translate in the work that I make. So, so yeah, I guess, I mean, I do teach also, but I only teach part-time. But I also, since I've been doing this fabric, I really want to research research the cotton industry as far as the textile manufacturing, and how to be more responsible with sourcing that kind of stuff, and also looking too at designers. Like I was looking at a lot of companies that have designers that design their fabrics, and the majority of them, when you look at their page of designers, it's all monochromatic. And so I'm really looking at companies that offer more diversity in kind of the in their designers and their backgrounds. The one that I've found so far, and I'm sure there's tons out there, but this company called Cotton and Steel, it's a West Coast company, and they really have a broad swath of designers. So I'm going to keep on, researching that and trying to share that information. Continue to make masks as needed. But I know that I'm not going to make masks forever, but I am happy and I'm really taken that I can contribute in a way to the betterment of society, really, in these making of these masks. So, yeah, I think that's kind of it.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, I very much came to political activism through crafting. So knitting hats for the Women's March in 2017 and knitting welcome blankets for refugees and that's sort of how I came to it. But so much of that and so much of the community of fiber arts people that I'm with who are also, very much political activists is very much about sort of practical items. They may have a political meaning or a statement behind them, but very much are sort of practical, like a mask that you wear or a hat that you wear or a sign that you carry in a particular march. So I wanted to sort of tease out a little bit. Chotsani, you were talking about making things like place settings, and Jen, now you're making these masks that are obviously very functional, and how that's sort of different in your mind when you do this kind of work, the sort of quote unquote practical pieces that are used in an everyday setting versus something that might be more of a decorative statement kind of item. What if you see a difference in sort of the way the political comes out in those?
Well, my goal is to get the handmade in as many houses as I can. And I think making pieces that are functional and are practical is a great way to do that. So that's kind of my take on that idea.
I think for me, it's minding the machine. So again, back into that idea of educating about, every machine is based on some part of your body, not the reverse. And so I think it's calling people lazy when they're being aesthetically lazy, which is why I'm okay with, non-repeatable pieces, highly decorative. As I'm maturing in age, I realize it's not my problem. That someone doesn't understand why my sugar jar is very small with an elaborate handle. Find your imagination. And I think that even the time period I spend a lot of time researching, I think things, have been more ornate and those things were more possible because there were less distractions, and I think part of my activism and really it just happens in the classroom and in meetings. I'm always, it's not usually public the way I do it, and it's in my titles. And I always calculate the right moment to say something to make sure that there are spoils in that battle to say something. People have to start stepping up to the table. It's not just the artist, who has to do all the work. So I'd like to see a shift happen that way, that folks, as Jen is talking about making conscious decisions, that, people recognize that in the mask that she makes, versus the masks that come from, who only knows where, So I think for me, it's engaging. It's back to that cotton ball, why I don't change it. We need to stop seeing everything in the conclusion, and begin to understand all the steps that got to that point.
And one, maybe a last question, and then lots of thank yous, and we want you to share your website addresses and all of that. There will be information for those of you who are listening. We'll put lots of links on the website for you. But, you're talking about how you're looking ahead and your commitment to teaching, your commitment to making, and in both of your cases. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see your role as a role model, as a leader, as a woman with expertise and wisdom to share. There's so many young women who are artists, want to continue to be artists, need to figure out how to make a go of it. Share with us your thoughts about what you say to the women you teach or the women you meet about how to proceed in life as a woman artist with a political commitment as well.
I think for me, the most telling moment or the most affirming moment was when Kamala said, "I'm speaking." Because I've done that, and it finally made me realize, I hope that some people are seeing that, realizing now when I have to let folks know, and I think students see me demonstrate that in terms of how I advocate for them, how I advocate for my discipline, closed mouth doesn't get fed. I ask. I follow through, I want to show students, colleagues, peers, supporting when, someone asks, and sometimes not taking an honorarium, that you're doing something because it's a conviction. It's not just for the next step, and I'm also aware I do focus on my career as well. So I show students there's a balance between the two. Everything's not a CV thing, and the CV is not always everything. And again, that's back to Georgia Gilmore.
Right.
Opening up her house. And she spoke to John F. Kennedy how she wanted to. I think she referred to him as a whore. In her own home, and he still ate her food. To sort of see that the way someone gave made people understand their sense of humor, their way of connecting with you, and always being yourself. I do my best not to code switch and talk directly the same way all the time. But it takes practice. It takes practice.
Yeah, for me, it's really about kind of being in the trenches with the students, like really encouraging them, but also, letting them know that it's the work isn't easy. It's going to be hard, and there's going to be plenty of failures. And really, the more risk you take, the more rewards are going to come from that. So to really get them to push themselves, not only in the work that they make, but the choices that they make in life, right? Like not staying in the same town, trying to, go experience something that's completely opposite from what they would how they normally would find themselves. And my husband, for instance, runs a program in China through West Virginia University where he takes students every fall, well, not this fall because of COVID, but every fall semester for almost 20 years, they've been going over to China in Jingzhen and completely immersing themselves in that culture. And just being able to give students that kind of global perspective, which many of them never get a chance to take, I think is really important. And so I'm really glad that I can be here and really encourage and support those students to go on that trip and make that effort. And a lot of the people that go from this university, it's their first plane ride, so it's like a big commitment for them. And I think, living in the area that I live in, it's rural Appalachia. And I'm learning a lot about the history here also because I've finally committed to being a resident forever. And so just kind of being able to immerse myself in that and understanding where my students are coming from too, where I didn't so much before. So I guess trying to put myself in their perspective, giving them a push to go do things that they haven't or might not have thought about doing before. Yeah, that's really it.
And how can everyone find more of both of your work?
My work is Jen Allen Ceramics. You can search me on Instagram. I think JenniferAllenCeramics.com is my website. But Instagram is a good first stop, and then you can link to my website from there.
Yep, it's the same thing. Everything's my name.
Yep.
ChotsaniElaine.com, Chotsani.com, Chotsani.org. I bought them all.
I'm speaking, right?
Chotsani's on the planet, so.
That's awesome.
Thank you both so much. I think that on this Eve of Thanksgiving, it was a wonderful conversation about what we can be thankful for, what we can think about going forward, what we can do together. So best wishes to you and to everyone who's listening.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone.
Happy
Thank you,
Thanksgiving.
everyone. Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving.